Paper's written on.
All right, there you go. Class dismissed. But we're going to look at some issues relating to issues of secular law, some common law, some examples like we normally do. And then we're going to take a look at Jewish law, and we're going to see that similar progression as we saw with honesty in our last lesson, the idea of recognizing that there's sort of a social good, and there's a legal component, there's a moral component, there's a divine component. That sort of continues a trend that we see in this course throughout. Those of you who were with us in the fall, continues a theme that we saw in the fall's course, the idea of the spiritual component, recognizing that Judaism views us as not being physical people with a spiritual component, but spiritual entities living in the physical world. And if last time we looked at the idea of telling the truth and having our words fit reality, then we're going to look at the way Stephen Covey defines integrity is conforming reality to our words, keeping promises, fulfilling expectations. We looked at keeping promises. What about fulfilling expectations? Obviously, you make a promise. There's an expectation that it be fulfilled, but there are other ways that there are expectations that can be made without directly saying, I promise, or trust me, I'm telling the truth. We're going to look at some of those examples, and to what extent must one make good on a verbal pledge. So look at the case studies. The first one, if someone want to read on page 237, it's a little bit long, but it's in English at least. All right. Yeah, why not?
A music mogul who offered $1 million for the return of a missing laptop was ordered to pay up after a jury ruled that he had reneged on his promise and owed the money to the auto shop owner who found him. The decision came Wednesday in federal court in Manhattan, where a day earlier, music producer and singer-songwriter Ryan Leslie took the stand to defend his decision not to pay Armin Augustine after the laptop was recovered 2 years ago. Leslie's main argument, even though he got the laptop back, he was unable to access his original tunes on his hard drive, and therefore the crucial intellectual property remained missing. The jury disagreed after deliberating about 3 hours. Ain't no way to get around ups and downs, Leslie, 34, New York City resident, tweeted after the decision. Jury of my peers rules for the plaintiff. Leslie announced the reward in November 2010 after a bag containing the MacBook, hard drive, $10,000 cash, and his passport disappeared from a car while Leslie was on tour in Cologne, Germany. He initially offered a $20,000 reward for the laptop's return, but increased it to $1 million in the interest of retrieving the invaluable intellectual property contained on the laptop and hard drive. The reward was advertised prominently, including in the video posted on YouTube and public appearances by Leslie. I actually had my whole new album on there, which I'd been working on in secret, and it got stolen. And Leslie said shortly after upping the reward. So right now I got a $1 million reward for anybody who can return my intellectual property to me. Not long afterward, Augustine, who runs a garage in Cologne, said he found the bag containing the laptop while walking his dog. He filed suit about a year later after Leslie refused to pay. It's unfortunate that my client has to go to such lengths to recover the rewards, attorney Michael Fishman said at the time.
Better be careful what kind of reward you promise, because you may end up having to pay it. And here a jury decided yes, even though he offered the reward expecting certain information, certain intellectual property back, didn't get it, nevertheless was ordered to pay. What about the second case study? And this is something that Stephen Covey quotes in his book, The Speed of Trust. Some time ago, my daughter McKinley had the lead role in a high school musical, and I made a commitment to her I'd be there. Scheduled to be on the road, but I planned to fly back in time to see her in the play. To me, I hadn't made an I will be there at all costs commitment. It was more of, oh yeah, I think I can make it. But to her, it was a commitment, and it was important. As I was talking to the client representative several weeks in advance of my road trip, they said, Stephen, we really need you to stay longer. I went to my daughter to see if I could renegotiate. However, I quickly realized that even trying was a big withdrawal. So I tried to lower expectations with the client. They were not happy with the request and really pushed me to stay. So I had a dilemma. Tonight we're talking about two case studies. Case study number one. Well, is he morally obliged to keep his commitment? And then Stephen Covey's scenario. Is he obliged to keep his commitment? Some initial thoughts. You agree with the decision in $1 million reward? Yeah?
So I agree with the decision when I read about it in the newspaper, but when I see the line here that says that in the interest of retrieving the invaluable intellectual property contained on the laptop, if for some reason it truly wasn't there, we don't know from the story if it's really not there, but if it's truly not there, then maybe he shouldn't have had to pay.
All right, so think about it also with regard to the differences in the cases. The first case, there's a reward that's prominently displayed that everybody knows about. Now, is that legally binding? You could argue not so. Second case, it's sort of a more informal commitment. Okay, I'm going to be there. Yeah, comments, thoughts?
The quote he has here, Leslie said shortly after upping the reward, so right now I got $1 million reward for anybody that can return my intellectual property to me. But he didn't return his intellectual property to him.
Okay, all right, so that's picked up on what Nathan pointed out. Yeah, right.
I think a lot has to do with what he really means, what people interpret somebody to mean, how serious that statement really is. I mean, some people can say things and you can take it on face value, or you could look a little deeper, really understand what is it intended by a person's comment. You know, so it's not black and white.
You touch upon various variables that can impact how we look at these cases. Intent. What was the intent, both in terms of the offer, in terms of the recipient? You know, when he said, like Stephen Covey said, "I'll be there." I didn't really be there at all costs. You know, it's so I'll be there down in 5 minutes. You know, that was an example we saw last week in terms of is that if you say I'll be down in 5 minutes when you certainly was that a lie. Now, legally doesn't make necessarily a difference. In the grand scheme of social value, morality, it might not make the biggest difference. It's one little white lie. But what about in terms of the spiritual? What kind of impact did it make? We spoke about that last time. So in these cases, you know, what are the different variables at play? And then we can look at some other scenarios. So for example, when we talk about some other scenarios like this one, the lawyer verbally commits to a charity to do 30 hours of pro bono work. Later she wants to renege because she has additional paying clients. Or landlord and potential renter verbally agree to sign a rental agreement the following day, but when the next day arrives, one of them changes his mind. Customer and jeweler settle on a price for a silver watch. Later that day, the value of silver depreciates. The customer no longer wants to buy the watch at the agreed upon price. Is that acceptable? Those who say yes, raise your hands. Those who think no, raise your hands. Okay, I'm shocked. There's a machlokas. There's a dispute. You know, it depends if you're a customer. It depends how many jewelers in the room. But there clearly are variables at play. Tom asks the neighbor to help him move out of his apartment. The neighbor at first agrees, but then realizes he's not in the mood for hauling. For in my mind, since I've shared with you before my connection of everything to Seinfeld, Keith Hernandez, you see that one? It's a move. That's a major commitment. Or a couple informs their rabbi they'll give a monthly donation of $200 to charity. But then the inspiration of the high holidays wears off, and there's no longer the same commitment. Have to throw one in there to realize, to rabbis and congregational life. Woman tells a business associate that she's committed to go on a diet after the new year begins. But then, that might be more about in terms of what a person is committing in their words. But when must a person keep a commitment? Now, I'm sure some of you may be thinking that there's a classic Jewish way out. What's a classic Jewish way out to avoid any of this stuff?
Bli neder.
Bli neder. Bli neder means without a promise. Now, this is, we're going to talk a little about neder. Neder means a vow. A shavua is another term, means an oath. There's a little bit of difference. Shavua is when you commit to do something, and a neder usually has to do with an object, not the person. But Judaism takes these things obviously very seriously. And Bli neder is one that is sort of like the catchword. Anytime you're going to say something, say Bli neder, because then you're sort of adding a variable that, maybe not. In fact, in Jewish law, there's a discussion, can charitable commitments ever be Bli neder? Even if you say Bli neder to a charitable commitment. I remember growing up in synagogue, some congregations, after people called to the Torah, the person called to the Torah is asked to make a commitment. The term is shnuddering. Is the Yiddish term because it comes from the Hebrew shenadar. The person is called, okay, shenadar, you're giving this amount of money. So it became shnuddering. And it was eliminated in many congregations. They didn't like it. Some congregations, they focus on it. It's where the synagogue makes its revenue. But I remember there was a discussion because the text of the schnuttering of this commitment just said that the person will give $18 to the synagogue. And I remember there was a whole discussion. They wanted to include the words Bali Neder. They wanted to give people the act of getting, so they make the commitment, but if they don't want to be held. Okay, very good. So that was a dispute. The dispute was between the synagogue treasurer and the rest of the membership. You can imagine. So we're going to look at first some issues relating to the legal system. Look at text number 1, page 242. Suppose men imagined there was no obligation to veracity and acted accordingly. Speaking as often against their own opinion as according to it, would not all pleasure of conversation be destroyed, and all confidence in narration? Men would only speak in bargaining, and in this too would soon lose all mutual confidence. Right. It's a common approach introduced in the Enlightenment. The idea that, same in terms of conversation, if you couldn't trust anyone whenever they said anything, then you could replace conversation with commitment. If everything was completely flexible, wishy-washy, subjective, then if nothing is actually committed, then you would never expect anything. Now, that might lower expectations. Maybe we can create some sort of relative approach that we saw last time, the whole utilitarian approach to interaction and truth, right? If it turns out good, then it's okay. This is a similar type of idea when it comes to commitment. Yeah, I'll say whatever I want, and maybe I'll fulfill it, maybe I won't, but let's lower all the expectations, it won't happen. Yeah?
What about a smachta?
Correct. So we're going to talk about that. Jewish law has some additional legal components to commitments that are made. And we'll talk about that in a second. There's a few of them, and some of them are actually very relevant this time because of selling of chametz. So we'll get to that. So another discussion of this is found in text number 2 from Peter Gillies, law professor and author. He basically makes a couple of points. That there are 3 elements of a contract. The first is the offer and acceptance. Someone makes an offer, you accept it, okay. That will help allow for an agreement to unfold. Then there's also an element, what he calls consideration. The idea that was there, does it seem like this is something that they're taking seriously? With both sides entering it with the intent of being legally bound by it. And then he talks about sort of the intention the third part is the intention to be legally bound by the contract. I just want to say, get down here in 15 minutes, I'll give you X. The way we reward our children. You got to be careful. It's sort of, my son wants a reward, I promise him money. He doesn't trust me if I tell him I'm going to give him 20 bucks anymore. Why? Buck. It's sort of a lot depends what's considered. Yeah, we joke about it, but what goes into making a contract? So for example, look at the first case where Leslie had offered the $1 million. Was that a real contract? Was it just throwing it out there? Was he serious? Did the person who heeded the call to return, did he take it seriously? He did take it seriously. But on both sides, did that exist or not? Yes?
Well, if he put up a video on YouTube, isn't that kind of sort of like a contract? Because he actually has proof of saying it's like, they catch you on video, actually openly saying I'm going to pay this if someone delivers.
Well, I would say that it would seem that the courts would agree. Right. They agree. But what about the second case? Stephen Covey says, I'll be there. Daughter says, thanks, Dad. Right. Do you have the same, you don't have the same element of consideration.
True, but you do have the consideration that it's your daughter.
Okay, it's probably much less legally binding or identifiable. Right. I don't think the same court that awarded $1 million would, find him a faulty marriage. Yeah, we have other issues when you deal with the realm of emotions, but that's sort of the idea of consideration. Yeah.
Take the 2 examples together, though. What you expect in the public sphere may be one level.
Right.
What you expect with a child and a parent may be another level. there are perhaps never contracts or almost never contracts.
Right.
And that might be the
Thank God for us
accepted-
parents.
Yeah, but that might be the expected norm
Right.
for the dual commitment. I'll be in
Right.
play and you'll be there.
Right, well, yeah, and I think that's why in the realm of parenting, there's certain things that certain types of a parent scolding a child is not the same level of actionable emotional abuse in the workplace. Right, so there's a different in spheres. But with regards to in the realm of common law and secular law, these are some of the issues at play. When we talk about Jewish law, we have to work on several different levels. So this is Nathan was introducing it. First, we start with when does the Beit Din take action? Right. Ideally, when Jews have claims against other Jews, the place for it to be adjudicated is in Beit Din. So the Talmud has whole discussions as to pretty much any case that you can imagine how it would be, how it would turn out. So what does the Beit Din say is the determining factor with regards to there being a commitment between two people? Look at text number 3 on page 244. This is Maimonides. An article is not acquired merely through verbal agreement, even if witnesses testify that the principals have reached an agreement. For example, a person says to another, I'm selling you this house, I'm selling this house to you, I'm selling this wine to you, and they fix the price. The purchaser agrees and says, I purchased it. The seller says, I have sold it. They tell witnesses, serve as witnesses this transaction. In such a case, their words are of no consequence, as if they had never spoken to each other at all. The same applies with regard to gift giving. Yeah, I'm going to give you, I'm going to take you out to dinner. I'm going to buy you something nice. If, however, except in a marital situation, then it's absolutely viable. Not for these reasons, but for others. Same applies with regard to gift giving. If, however, the purchase was completed through a kinyan, one of the designated acts in which property is transferred, the purchaser acquires the object. There's no need for witnesses to effect this transfer. Once a kinyan is performed, neither the seller nor the buyer may retract. So if you have a kinyan performed, then it works. If no kinyan, it's not enforcement. What's interesting is when you think of kinyan or acquisition, it's not money changing hands. When they talk about kinyan, they talk about kinyan mishicha. You actually have to physically drag the item. Or you have to have hagba'ah. You have to lift up the item. That's what the slide had. You have to put your hands around. And that's that can complicate things. Because
who has
the buyer has to actually move it physically from the seller's domain.
That's the way you get married.
So there's a whole discussion with regard to how you can sell karka, how you can sell land. That's not so simple. So what ultimately happens is that we have to introduce certain other components relating to if there is no kinyan. Look at text number 4. Halacha created the general concept of Kinyan Agav Sudar in order to ensure the fulfillment of obligations. The party undertaking an obligation commits some symbolic act of grasping an object, such as a sudar, a head covering, a handkerchief, and pulling it away from the other person's grasp, which denotes the legal conclusion of the agreement and cannot then be rescinded. This act of taking possession is carried out in many spheres of halakha to establish the validity of various legal actions, the guarantees contained in the marriage contract, agreement of both parties to arbitration, etc. Right, that's what Carol was saying, the idea of taking hold of someone else. If I would give you my pen or my watch or my handkerchief and you lift it up, and by you taking hold of that, you're now taking responsibility for or acquisition of a particular object. Another example, with you asked about real estate, you can sign a contract. And then the lifting up of the contract, by taking that contract and walking away with it, taking it from one to the other, that is a type of a real kinyan. And this is very, very much more symbolic. You're not really exchanging anything. Right? You may have seen, especially this is popular, the one that's in that example there is when they sell the chametz. When the chametz is sold, when the rabbi sells people's chametz or acts as the shliach, as the messenger to sell the chametz with the non-Jew, these are all the various types of kinyanim which are done. There's a whole contract, there's money that's exchanged, and there's this sort of symbolic. There's also an idea that sort of extra kinyan beyond just the technical kinyanim methods of acquisition of the Talmud, anything that's accepted practice in society also goes. So shaking hands, if that is accepted in a particular society, of sealing a deal, that could also work. So when the chametz is sold, the rabbi or whoever's leading the sale will shake hands with the non-Jew to also affect this transaction. But you may have seen, if you've watched, sometimes if you've seen this taking place at a wedding, usually it's the groom takes hold of something that belongs to one of the two witnesses to the signing of the ketubah marriage document. They offer something that belongs to them, and he lifts it up, and by lifting up something that belongs to them, he's also taking on the responsibilities of everything written in the ketubah. What's wrong with it is that what does he do with the pen afterwards? He gives it back to the person who gave it to him. It's sort of, it's very, it's much more symbolic. It's one step removed from the actual. It's even more symbolic. Yeah.
I had a question about, is a kinyan considered legitimate or not based on age of the
Sure.
people making
Sure.
kinyan, and what about the gender?
Sure. No. Anyone who knows what goes into what's taking place, anyone that has da'at, anyone that is able to formulate intent, doesn't have to be post-bar bar mitzvah, man, woman. But the Talmud talks about at what age does a child acquire the ability to do something like this. So the Talmud has the formulation, tzror v'zorko egos v'notlo. It's like teaching constitutional law. Tzror v'zorko egos v'notlo. Tzror, a stone, zorek, you throw it away. Egos, if it's a nut, you keep it. Kid knows the difference between a pebble and a piece of candy. So you know what's there's a value that you have the ability to do this. Yeah.
What's the punishment for someone who breaks a contract?
Well, then if it's actionable, then Beit Din can remove. If you promise something and a kinyan was made that you're selling something to me and you break that, then they will remove the item from your possession, give it to me.
That's if they could actually enforce it.
Correct. No, but where Beit Din is able to utilize their jurisdiction, that's how they would enforce it. For example, a Beit Din, plural of Beit Din is Batei Din. Jewish courts can be designated as the arbitrators in a binding arbitration situation, and that would be legally recognized. So those are the types of scenarios that work. But what are some basic differences between Talmudic law and common law? So we've seen that for Talmudic law, speech is not enough. If I say to you, I bought it, you say to me, you bought it, and the witnesses say that and test it, doesn't mean anything. You need more than just speech. When it comes to common law, it could create a binding contract. Because otherwise, you can end up with a lot of scenarios that would be too loosey-goosey. Consideration is not important. There's no distinction between gifts and sales. That was when Maimonides introduced. Common law would very much, consideration is paramount. A commitment to receive a gift is not a contract. And Jewish law would recognize it. So, for example, if something was done and undertaken in Jewish law, and the Beit Din's in charge, they would force you to give up whatever it was that you committed to as a gift. Works out well if you're the bar mitzvah boy, and the Beit Din's in charge, and you got promised something. It can end up being working out very well. Yeah.
What did you say in common law? I mean, you have to sign contracts? I wouldn't imagine.
Anytime you sell a house, buy a car.
Yeah, you have to sign a contract, a legal contract.
Correct, but there are times
speak and
that's not
shake
true.
hands.
That's not true. We gave the example in the beginning. The guy promised the guy $1 million for finding his thing. The guy returned the thing. The court made him pay the $1 million.
No, but I've heard of cases where somebody buys the house under, let's say you shake hands on a house and someone makes a higher offer to the owner of the house.
So that's one of the examples we're going to see. Common law probably, secular law probably would let that happen. Jewish law would not. But we have to look at some of the extrajudicial examples of how this operates from a Jewish perspective. What's the underlying difference between these two cases with regards to within Judaism, speech matters, and there's no distinction between gift and transaction. In secular law, the other way around. Any thoughts? In my mind, it comes back to what we said before with regards to some of the rules that states have with regards to children being obligated to take care of parents who need support. Because if the kids don't do it, then society will have to take care of it. It's always about common interests. But both systems agree that for a court to take something away from one person to the other, there has to be something significant here. But Jewish law are more willing to go beyond the formal legalisms of the contract. It's not just about the common good. There's something about, is this correct? Are you being honest? And it's trying to keep you on the straight and narrow. Yes?
It's strange to me that here speech seems like it's not at all very powerful. But in like what we were learning before in these like lessons, speech and words are so powerful
Correct.
and so highly regarded in like Jewish law. So why is there
Well,
that difference?
So I think that on the technical, external, judicial level, actions are what make actions speak more loudly than words. Now, if we start talking about divine and ethical and moral, we're going to see that, as you can imagine, or if you didn't imagine it, start thinking about it, Judaism is going to expect a lot more out of you than just the technical kinyan, handshake, handkerchief. Right? You can imagine that Judaism is not going to be happy with backing out of the deal. But I think that one of the things that Jewish law has, especially in civil law, is that it has a construct of this is the letter of the law, and this is beyond the letter of the law. Now, some look at that as an excuse, okay, I'm going to follow the letter of the law. But if we see our mission as to try and elevate scenarios, then you're going to elevate this physical existence, and we're going to be interested in going beyond. Because on a level, something I have mentioned before, Judaism is about obligation. It needs to hammer home the notion of obligation, and it can do that on the base level. It's harder on some of the. It's harder in the realm of the going beyond the letter of the law in some of the cases. Well, let's see how it plays out, though, because if we start talking about some of the ethics and morals involved, secular law is not there to enforce the unenforceable. Jewish law doesn't end with the courts. It's about much more. Look at text 5a on page 247. Once happened that some people paid Rabbi Elie bar Yosef for salt, but they did not take possession of the salt. They did not make the kinyan. Subsequently, the value of salt appreciated. So, in theory, what is he going to want to do? He's going to want to get more money for the salt that he sold. So Rabbi Elie approached Rabbi Yochanan and asked whether he could return the payment and renege on his agreement to sell the salt. Rabbi Yochanan told him, go and give them the salt. If not, be ready to accept upon yourself divine retribution. So what did Rabbi Yochanan respond? Well, he's not violating the letter of the law. No kinyan was made. But you know what? This is, there's an expression in Yiddish, pasnish. This is not appropriate. That's a Syrian term also. But it's you know, if you agree to a sale and you have some of the payment, but there's no kinyan, you know, the question is, what are your rights? And we see that Rabbi Yochanan is telling Rabbi Elie it's extremely unethical to renege. It's not a perfect parallel with secular law, because in secular law, money transaction the thing is done. But according to the rules of Jewish law, there's no kinyan, there's no transaction yet. The material hasn't changed hands. You're technically allowed to back out, but it doesn't end there. This is based on a concept that's introduced in text 5b. The sages said, one who punished the people of the generation of the flood, the people of the generation of the dispersion, that's the Tower of Babel, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Egyptians at the sea, he will ultimately punish the person who does not abide by his word. The term for this in Hebrew is mishapara. The idea, even in a situation where the court cannot enforce justice, God will mete out justice, the mishapara adjuration. God who took revenge on those horrible people in Sodom, he's going to come and get you. Now you may think, you know, okay, that doesn't bother you. All right, that could be, you know, we feel a little bit more removed from God. But this is what the Talmud introduces. This is what Beit Din can't enforce it, but you know what? God's going to take revenge upon you. The examples that are mentioned in the way God took retribution: flood, dispersion, Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Egyptians.
It's pretty harsh.
Correct. Yeah, you who want to sell salt for a higher price, make a little extra income, you're like the Egyptians. Why use those examples? Any common denominators come to mind?
They all have to do with promises.
They all,
They all have to do with promises.
in terms of what do you mean by that?
Like, well, with Egypt, you know, Pharaoh said he's going to let them go, and he kept
Okay.
backing out.
All right, so these are people who changed, who deviated from the straight path of the word. Okay, anything else? So when you think about it, none of these societies actually was commanded by God to live in a particular fashion. It's before there was Judaism. It's before there was much in the way of specific instruction. You had the Noahide rules. You had the basic idea of be a good human being. But the idea is these are people who did not necessarily violate a particular law. Nevertheless, they were destroyed. So you're not violating a particular law either. But it's horrific. It's horrific to change your word. As people were reneging, as people began to renege more and more in Jewish history, this is the Talmud. In the times of the Talmud, they were realizing that people may decide to back out of the sale at the agreed upon price and decide to sell it for more. The rabbis began to speak more loudly and clearly about this mishapara concept. And so much so that they began to see this as also being something, mishapara, it's a fact stated in the Talmud. It then became a proclamation read by the Beit Din. Over time, it was read as a malediction, and it was also ultimately done in public, sort of like putting the guy in the stocks, right? That ultimately, it was basically you had someone going, hear ye, Elie Weinstock is backed out of the sale. These were meant to apply very social pressures from something that is sort of a throwaway line in the Talmud became something that was meant to shame and socially ostracize a person who would not be true to his commitments. Yeah.
Only involve stuff that have to do with money and contracts, or also, like you said, if someone says I'm going to help someone and they don't, is that the same level?
It's the person who does not abide by his word. Now, you could say it probably had much greater severity, or it meant more when there was real money involved. If come over Friday night, no, I don't mean it.
Like, for instance, if somebody, RSVPs for a wedding,
right,
and doesn't show up because whatever different reasons that could happen.
All right. Well, if you have an excuse.
That's why you have Hatarat Nedarim.
If you have an excuse, you have an excuse. I think that the mishapar initially was meant to create an additional obstacle to people backing out of arrangements which were not necessarily which would not be enforceable by Beit Din. The courts can't provide relief for the person who feels wrong in this case. You change your mind, mishapar. You're going to be. It's sort of it's like making fun of someone's mother. That's like ooh. It's like I double dog dare you. Anyone know where that's from? Christmas Story. How about putting the tongue on the front of you? Anyway. They said your tongue can stick to the pole, the flagpole. But it's these are fighting words, and they wanted to. They say mishapar was not something that was taken so lightly. If there's an excuse, there's an excuse. But I think that this is. In some cases, there's legal action that can be taken if a kinyan is involved. If no kinyan is technically involved, we don't want to let you off scot-free. The rabbis can involve. So I think there's certain extrajudicial steps they can take. Whether you find them effective or not, it depends. Back then they were effective. Let's move to a different level as well with regard to the moral expectation. Because even if nobody's around, there's still the idea that the God's there. And there's still something to be concerned with. Look at text number 6, if someone will please read it. On page 249. Okay.
When people agree to a transaction with a verbal commitment alone, it is appropriate for them to keep their word, even though payment or deposit was not issued and the mark was not on the merchandise. If the seller or purchaser retracts, although the one retracting would not receive the mishapara adjuration, he is nevertheless considered untrustworthy, and the sages are displeased with him. Similarly, if one commits to give a colleague a gift but fails to do so, this person is considered untrustworthy.
So what are we introduced to here? No Beit Din, no, you're acting badly, no public declarations. There's just okay, you can be viewed untrustworthy. The idea that this is the Shulchan Aruch, this is the code of Jewish law. It's codifying the idea that you're on the outs. You will not be viewed as a nice person. And when you talk about Jewish community, which is so back in those times so small, you don't want. It's sort of the idea you'll never get a good shidduch. Ever hear that expression in today's Orthodox Jewish community? People are always concerned with what types of things are going on because if you find out what's going on behind closed doors in the family, then you won't be able to get a good shidduch. In some communities, it goes to whether or not you put plastic over the tablecloth on Shabbos. Like some real extreme cases. I don't know if that's good or bad. I just don't know. But the idea of we are concerned with how we are perceived in the Jewish community. That could be an extreme case that doesn't hold as much relevance for us. But we are worried about our reputations. There's some similarities, certain parallel cases with this that emerge in the whole discussion in today's Orthodox community about the aguna scenario. Right? The husband has to be the one to provide the religious divorce. He has to initiate it and can hold up the wife and keep her a chained woman that she's not going to be divorced by refusing. And some of the mechanisms that exist, some of it is a prenuptial agreement, there's an antenuptial agreement, but one of the components that takes place is social pressure. And there's an organization, it's called the ORA, Organization for the Resolution of Agunot, where there are cases where a husband refuses to give his wife a get. They will go to his house and stand in front of his door and protest. Or they'll stand in front of his office and say, you don't want to do business with this guy, he's a louse, he's a crook, he's a terrible person. That's the idea that's introduced here. The goal is the idea of maintaining our reputations. First off, you're supposed to be an honorable person. So that's something that a person who backs out of deals based on the letter of the law and isn't even necessarily worthy of a mishakara, he's on the back. He's on the outs within the community. Yeah.
I was just going to say that does someone have to give someone divorce? They're not divorced yet legally.
A lot depends on the scenario. In general,
because the woman could hold things up that
correct. Aguna is not only a one-way street, but the other way around. You know, often what is encouraged is to get the get component out of the way and have the Beit Din hold the get process one step from conclusion, so that neither are technically religiously divorced, but now it's the Beit Din's prerogative when to release them from being halachically married. So, for example, if a woman receives a get, she also needs to get sort of what's called the patur, which is the receipt of the get. It's proof that she got the get. And therefore, often what will happen is the husband initiates the get, and the Beit Din will hold off the patur, which means neither of them are technically able to get remarried religiously until the process is over. They sort of try and stagger it. But sometimes if you wait too long and the civil divorce is over, what motivation does the husband have to then give a religious divorce? Not married civilly, and you know, if he wants to get in the way, it's very easy to. There's really no motivation. So, and the idea being that you know, it's not just about what the courts will say. It's not just about having divine punishment invoked upon us. As human beings, we want to maintain our trustworthiness, which can be in our reputation, which can be degraded with this. Now, is there an exception? Right? Is there? Let's say we know that if you make a kinyan, if there's a transaction here, you can't back out. We know that if you promise something, you're not supposed to back out because you'll either have the mishapara, you'll get the heebie-jeebie curse against you, or you'll be viewed as a negative person. Are you ever able to back out? So look at text number 8. Text number 8, Rabbi Zerachia Halevi wrote. This is Rabbi Yerucham quoting Rabbi Zerachia Halevi. The ruling is only applicable if there's no price change. If there were a price change, the ruling is not relevant. This means that if there were a considerable price change, the person who retracts is not considered untrustworthy. Right? Maybe if there's a price change, or if there's a considerable price change, then you can back out. So if you agree to sell the house for $300,000, the next day it's the only house left in the block, after all of them fall down for some reason, it's worth $1 million, then there is the ability to renege in this type of a scenario. If there's no kinyan, there's no need to lose. This is something that we saw before with regards to the person is sometimes allowed to lie in order not to lose money. I don't know. I don't think it does well for Jewish stereotypes to protest. Yeah, I'm not going to lie unless I'm going to lose a lot of money. But there is that concept. Look, it's similar if you think back to our examples. Right, Stephen Covey planned on attending, but what happened? The company that hired him expected him to be there, changed the rules of the game. It was not possible for him to back out without losing. You have that sort of Jewish law has that element of a moral exception. So you have what the Beit Din can do formally, technically, legally. You have sort of some extrajudicial opportunities or options if people are doing the wrong thing. Beyond that, it's about being a moral person. You should never be viewed as someone who reneges on their word. However, you don't have to suffer for this. You don't have to suffer a loss to maintain this reputation. But there's one step further, and this is a term that you may have heard before. It's called midat chasidut. Midas chasidus. It's the idea of acting in a pious fashion. Right? There's the letter of the law, there's the spirit of law, there's something called holiness. There's the idea of being the person who can always be relied upon to honor everything. Look at text number 9, page 251. Even when not morally expected, it is nevertheless the way of the pious to honor all verbal commitments. You don't lie, you don't renege, you always do as you say you're going to do. And that's something that, even if it's not required per se, it's something that is viewed as a lofty ideal. How lofty? It's not even based upon what you say. Look at text 10a on the next page. This is a verse from Psalm 15. Who is the person who will dwell on God's holy mountain? Who will live in his tent? He who walks uprightly, acts righteously, and speaks truth in his heart. What does it mean to speak truth in the heart? Well, keep your word is one thing. Keep your intention. Look at text 10b. Rav Safra was selling a donkey. A person came and wanted to purchase it. At that moment, Rav Safra was reciting the Shema prayer. The person asked Rav Safra, will you sell it to me for this amount of money? Rav Safra was saying Shema. He did not answer. The person thought Rav Safra didn't want to sell at that price, so he raised the offer. Oh, he's getting silence. He decided to raise the price, raise his offer. Rav Safra didn't answer him. When Rav Safra finished the Shema, he said, I decided to sell it to you as soon as I heard your initial offer. More than that, I will not take. The idea of upholding even mental commitments. Even if there's no agreement, no payment, no kinyan, you decide to do something, that's what you follow. And this is something that, if you think that if you think this is easy, great, you're pious. If you think it's tough, well, we all have what to strive for. As there were exceptions to morality, there are also exceptions to piety. If someone will please read text number 11 on page 253.
A God-fearing person ought to honor even mental commitments. If a merchant mentally resolved to sell at a particular price, but the buyer was unaware of this resolution and therefore added to the offer, the seller should not accept more than the original amount, as per the ideal of speaking truth in one's heart. The same applies to the buyer. This ideal pertains to all matters between people. One ought to honor a mental commitment to bestow favor upon another if one has the ability to do so. On the other hand, concerning one's own needs that are not mitzvah-related, one need not honor even verbal commitments.
Right, so if it has to do with your own, if you're thinking something, maybe, what was that case study? I'm gonna work on my diet. That's that's just the best. I think about a diet and I don't have to follow it. That's good to know. But midat chasidut need not apply if one does not reach a firm resolution. Right? In the case of the Talmud, the rabbi said, when you name the price, I decided you're going to do it. But if you name the price, maybe this, maybe not. Imagine the level of intellectual honesty that's required to analyze what your initial response was to something like this. A second exception that we see is if it's not, you don't have the ability to act upon it. If you're not able to do something, even if you want to do something, you're thinking of committing to do something. You hear about Israel bonds. Israel bonds, 1,000, 5,000. Yeah, I don't have that kind of money. So there, you also don't have the same level. And if it does not pertain to helping others, if it's something that is an interaction between you and me, you offer me something that's about a purchase, it's about something I'm committing to do, then I should go with my gut, I should go with my instinct, I should go with my thought. But if it's really all about me, then I'm given a little bit more latitude. So you have that component as well. So what we have gone through is we've seen we took a look at some of the secular case studies, some of the factors that go into secular law. We then looked at Jewish law with regard to the Beit Din, letter of the law, acquisition, and Kinyan, methods of exchange. We spoke about how the rabbis also though recognized that people were not keeping their word and introduced this idea of Misha Para. Just because no one obligates you to do something is no excuse to be able to change your mind. And even in cases beyond that, there's sort of a person standing in society morally and ethically that requires someone to do the right thing. As well as there being a religious imperative and something to strive for religiously, that a person always act properly upon his or her commitments, even if they're not articulated. The idea of maintaining a certain sense of truth is an expression the Talmud uses in different contexts. Tocho kiboro. Your insides are like the outsides. And the idea that if you try to be honest, with regards to interacting with others in sort of verbal or in social or in communal situations, are you going to be that honest? Are you inside as well the way you think? Sometimes happens. I'll admit, happens to me sometimes. You say one thing. You may not be thinking another. Oh, it's so nice to see you. It is so nice to see all of you tonight. But sometimes you say one thing and have in mind something different. I don't think necessarily that's something that's actionable. Beit Din's not going to be able to catch me on it or shout, hold me to it, and the like. But this is something between me and myself. Am I living up to the standards that I set for this? And so we talked about commitments and pledges. Let's go back to something that we introduced a little bit earlier, this idea of oaths and promises, oaths and vows. Commitments relate to other people. Jewish law looks at something that Jewish law looks at neder and shvu as oaths and vows as something that relates to what about guarantees or deals we make with God. How is that viewed? Now, someone before, I think, mentioned Kol Nidre, that on Yom Kippur, the first prayer of the day is when we say, all of our vows, please erase that. It's pretty good when you think about it. But it doesn't really fit with what we're saying in terms of trying to live upright and morally and honestly.
I was going to say, we do, I don't know what we do in Ashkenazi community. Do you do Hatarat?
There is also, in general, we should back up for a second. There is a concept called that you can have your promises annulled. It's something called Hatara or Hafara. There are ways that you can go to a Beit Din and the rabbis can say, no, okay, this isn't automatic. This doesn't work with anything and everything. Usually there has to be good reason. And I took it upon myself, I'm going to go to morning services every day for a year. Okay, that can mean waking up early even on your days off. So you can go to the rabbis and say, look, I would love to do it. I didn't realize it meant never sleep again. That's too much to handle. That doesn't work with, you promised that I would visit my grandmother 3 times. Maybe to say I promised to visit my grandmother 3 times and then say, well, I didn't really want to is not a good enough excuse. If the price of gas goes up too much, if there's other outside factors which make it more difficult, then you will have the grounds for Hatara, as it's called. Hatarat Nedarim. It's done in the communities very often around the high holiday season. Kol Nidre is something very similar on the communal level. But we talk about recognizing our commitments religiously as taking on significance because the object or the other person involved here is not another person, it's God. Look at text number 12 and 255. If one says, I shall awake early and study this particular chapter, this particular tractate, this person has uttered a great vow to the God of Israel. No one said...
That's Daf Yomi, isn't
Huh? Well, it could be Daf Yomi, it could be just a one-day thing, it could be an everyday thing. But you have this idea that, the idea that laws of commitments are about treating other human beings respectfully. Then we also, if we move to oaths and vows are between man and God. And we saw that a person can retract on certain commitments to give a large gift, for example, without being condemned as untrustworthy because the potential recipient isn't relying upon this. Right? If there's another character that is human just like us, there are situations, there are exceptions to the rule. Not so when there is a mitzvah commitment, when there There's a promise made with God. Look at text number 13. Distinction between sizable and minor gifts only applies if the recipient is well off. If, however, one commits to give a gift to a poor person, one cannot renege on this commitment, whether it is a sizable gift or a minor gift, because a commitment to help the poor has a status of a halachic vow. Our mitzvot our mitzvot are vows. It's not so easy to get out of vows. Now, if you had the money, now you don't have the money, there's a way to annul. There's a discussion in the Talmud. Let's say a person says, I swear I'm going to eat a pig. I'm not. I don't mean it. You're going to shut the video off now and then everyone's going to think I'm going to have pork. But let's say a person says something like that. I swear that I'm going to kindle a fire on the Shabbos or something like that. Does that vow work?
No.
Obviously not, because we can't promise to do things that are forbidden. The Talmud has the idea that all religious commitments, all mitzvot, commandments, mushba v'omed mehar Sinai. Sinai was basically an oath to do the right thing. So therefore, any type of commitments or taking upon ourselves to do the wrong thing does not work. Yeah?
This isn't just being a Jew commitment, and you don't have a choice in that.
Correct. Correct. And that is why you can't say I'm going to do X. Or that's another reason why all sins are breaking our vows. The idea that the fact that you didn't actively take the vow, if you're born Jewish, doesn't work. Connects a little bit to the idea that you may have heard of a concept that if a child is converted to Judaism as a child, obviously a child converted doesn't have the da'at, doesn't have the requisite understanding to take upon themselves Judaism. There's the idea of when they reach age, bar bat mitzvah, you should tell them a little bit, you should tell them, give them the chance to back out. Now, this is not really practically implemented so much. Like you can imagine in a situation where family adopts a child in bar mitzvah, you really don't have to keep this. Yeah, you make a run for it. We, practically speaking, don't do it that way. That's a separate discussion. But we all basically took promises. We took oaths to follow the thing. The Talmud has a discussion. You may have heard the whole idea that a child in utero learns all of Torah, is exposed to all of Judaism. An angel comes and teaches the fetus everything, and then when the child is born, the angel on the way out, right, taps the child on the lip. That's why we have a cleft over here, and we forget everything. And this is a very famous passage in the Talmud that has a whole